Good afternoon. The global public health crisis caused by the 2020 coronavirus pandemic has, over the past few weeks, fundamentally changed the way we live our lives. Some of these changes will be temporary and many will have long-lasting effects. While there may be challenging consequences, there are also positive outcomes and opportunities for us as our community comes together to overcome the greatest challenge of our time. Since long before the first case of COVID-19 was confirmed in Jersey on the 10th of March, we have been planning carefully through this uncharted territory to protect islanders from the outset. Our response has been planned around three priorities: life, livelihoods and well-being. In Jersey, we have an amazing array of businesses and enterprises that we need to protect for many reasons. Firstly, we need the whole economy to recover quickly when we are through the worst of this disruption. Keeping businesses operational is critical to keeping people in work. Secondly, we must try to maintain the critical relationship between employer and employee to protect from redundancies and job losses now and into the future. Thirdly, we must also ensure that businesses have the people and skills around them to adapt where possible to face this difficult and challenging situation. We are seeing many businesses doing this already, and with incredible innovation and speed. Fourthly, we must protect the self-employed people and the sole traders on the island. And finally, we must never forget in this very difficult time that it's far better and quicker for individuals and families to be paid directly from their employer than it is to have to start claiming benefits. I have been hugely impressed by the resilience of local businesses and their employees over the last month. Their ability to adapt to difficult circumstances and their desire to keep working and their livelihoods intact. As I have stated since the beginning of this crisis, politicians must react and be agile to the needs of people and businesses on the island. Therefore, following extensive feedback from local businesses and stakeholders and the welcome assistance and guidance of Jersey Business, I am pleased to report that the Council of Ministers have agreed to enhance the Government Payroll Co-funding Scheme in Phase 2. We previously announced that for April, May and June we would refund employers, including charities, a maximum of £1,600 per employee per month. That is 80% of a worker's salary, up to £2,000. This funding would originally only be made available providing that the employer paid their employees in full in the normal way. To benefit from the scheme, businesses also had to demonstrate material detriment, confirming a drop in turnover of at least 30% in the month because of COVID-19. The amendments we are announcing today provide additional flexibility for employers who are struggling the most and giving them the best opportunity to ensure their continued viability and increasing their ability to retain their staff in employment. Where a business can prove that it has insufficient working capital or cash flow to enable it to meet normal obligations, it will not be required to contribute a mandatory percentage to the scheme, and it can therefore pass the value of the subsidy it receives directly to the employee up to a maximum of £1,600. And I would like to stress at this stage that we expect businesses to do everything in their power to ensure workers receive their agreed wage. However, where there is a risk that the employee would not be paid, it is preferable that they can continue to benefit from remaining in employment, albeit on reduced hours, rather than potentially facing layoff or redundancy. Employers will still be required under the employment law to agree all changes to employment contracts with their staff in the normal way. For the self-employed, I can confirm that islanders who work for themselves and are affected by COVID-19 business disruption will receive a payment of 80% of their average monthly income based on figures for 2019, up to a total of £1,600 per month for April, May and June 2020. As a result of the changes announced today, employers in Jersey, like the UK, will now be able, in specific circumstances, to be reimbursed for up to 80% of employee wages from the government. However, unlike the UK furlough scheme, that employer can still utilise the employee for work over this time. This contributes to positive activity in the economy and helps islanders continue to work. The full scheme is expected to cost up to $138 million over 3 months and can be reviewed for extension if disruption continues after June 2019. Can I also take this opportunity to say that planning is already underway to support businesses through the recovery phase once medical advice allows for the easing of social distancing and the stay-at-home measures. We are also planning to engage with local business experts and our specialist advisors to make a robust plan for our economic future. And I would like to stress that as our economy recovers, we will need to work together to replenish our reserves in the coming years. And we will work with islanders and businesses to make sure that this is done in a sensible way that is fair and affordable to all. I'm sorry for have done a lot of speaking lately. I'm beginning to lose my voice, so therefore I'm very pleased to hand over to Senator Gorst. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Chief Minister. As Senator Farnham has just said, this is a crisis about lives, livelihoods and well-being. And one of the government's priorities throughout this stage of the crisis has been to, where possible, support islanders in their jobs, i.e. working with business to ensure that islanders could stay employed. And the Co-Payroll Scheme is about a contract between government and businesses to support islanders in their jobs. And we said when Senator Farnham and I were last together addressing this issue that the scheme needed to be flexible and agile, as Senator Farnham has just reiterated again today, and that we were open to representations and to an understanding of what was happening to businesses in the real economy as we were in lockdown. And therefore, we have listened to submissions, particularly from Jersey business, who are speaking to businesses on a daily basis about the challenges that they face. And they've told us that some businesses are finding it particularly difficult to pay their staff, even with the government's 80% subsidy. And they told us particularly the smaller business, the thousands of smaller businesses that employ less than 10 members of staff. So the scheme remains generally as we previously announced, and that is that employers are expected to pay a 20% co-payment with the government's 80% co-payment. But recognising that the effect of lockdown upon some of our local good businesses means that because of lockdown, they've got little or no income and they have little or no working capital. And that means that's put them in a difficult position when it comes to supporting their employees with the 20%. And so what we are, and what Senator Farnham has just announced today, is that the Council of Ministers have agreed that that 20% co-payment doesn't need to be mandatory, but for where businesses can prove and show to government that they have, as I've said, little or no income and little or no working capital, then they don't and are not required to pay that 20%. But again, as Senator Farnham has just said, we would ask businesses to explore all possibilities with their employees around working hours, around the ability of them to raise working capital using some of the other schemes that the government has put in place. and then making application to government saying that they're struggling with those two particular issues. Already, of course, having to meet the detriment test about the effects of lockdown upon their business. The details of the scheme will be published tomorrow. That's Thursday, the 23rd of April. The online application portal will be ready for applications to apply for funding on the 1st of May, and we expect the first subsidies to be paid from the 5th of May this year. We in government are going to continue to be responsive to the needs of all islanders throughout this crisis. Please continue to approach us, talk to us about your concerns, talk to us about where you think we can refine the policies and the mechanisms that we've got in place, because then together, as Senator Farnham said, we can face the lifting of the lockdown and the future that we need to come together to mould and drive together from a stronger position. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senators. Now we have members of the media here to ask some questions about the Phase 2 of the scheme. And first, I'd like to go to Fiona Pottinney from Bailiwick Express.
Thank you very much for that update, Minister, Assistant Minister. We're very grateful for that additional detail. If I could just go to, I've got questions for both of you. If I could just go to Senator Farnham first for a bit of detail on the scheme. We've been contacted by many islanders, particularly many people in the hospitality industry, who are concerned about whether the generosity of the scheme might have been overstated. We've been told, for example, that if you take into account ITIS and GST, the support is probably closer to 57%, not 80%, or around £57 in every £100. So can you provide your thoughts on that? Has the generosity perhaps been overstated on that front for those that are still going to be with the 80-20 split?
Thank you. I don't ever recall saying that the scheme is generous. It is actually meant to be essential. It's meant to keep people in work. It's meant to keep people in jobs. It's meant to provide essential financial support to businesses so they can continue to employ people and keep people available so that they can reopen quickly as the crisis abates. So I don't think generous is the right word, but it is really very important that we do provide this financial help. And it's about protecting jobs just as much as it is about helping businesses.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. And just before I move on to Senator Gorst, might I ask you also for some clarity on an additional matter that we've been contacted about? Currently, some islanders that stay at home to care for children under school age can protect their social security contributions with the Home Responsibility Protection Scheme. So we've heard from a few couples, one in particular, who run a small business, and say they've not been told whether one of them will be eligible because they've been using the scheme and they haven't therefore paid some social security contributions. So are self-employed parents and those who employed staff on this protection scheme able to access the co-funding support?
Well, actually, we've identified a number of situations like that, which we're working to iron out. The idea of the scheme is to help as many people as possible, and as Senator Gorst alluded to, the officers are putting final details around the scheme now, and we will be addressing that, and we'll be covering that in the final detail, but we're very alive to those sort of situations.
May I just add an answer to that question as well? Senator Farnham is absolutely right. He and I have been contacted by a number of self-employed individuals for whom the normal rules around contribution history are not suitable for this scheme. And so we have undertaken to deal with those self-employed issues, which we know are more complex because they fall under the social security law, but looking at them at a very high level, and therefore without the detail of the individual case, we can't say for certain. But it seems to both of us, and we've agreed, that those individuals that have got uncertainties about the self-employment contribution history shouldn't be uncertain, and we want to make sure that the scheme covers them. Equally in reverse, those that are currently benefiting from the particular exemption that you referred to, we are already, of course, giving exemptions to islanders right across the social security scheme by deferring the payment, but saying to islanders that their record will not be depleted because of that, and therefore I think those individuals will probably benefit from that approach as well.
Fiona, do you have
Thank you
any
very
questions?
much for
More
that
questions,
clarification.
Fiona?
And yes, if I could just turn to Senator Gorst now on the topic of tax rises. You told us last time you were at the podium that there's no such thing as free money, and indeed that warning of tax rises was repeated yesterday by the Treasury Minister. But as I'm sure you'll be aware, the former Chief Minister Frank Walker took to Twitter yesterday stating that perhaps we should be looking at replenishing the rainy day fund over the long term rather than a fix like this. How would you respond to those comments?
Well, not only that, I think in a local publication today, the Treasury Minister and I were criticised for being too honest. It seems that whatever government ministers say during this crisis, we're going to get criticism from one side or the next. For my part, I believe that being honest with the public about the strength of the public finance, let's not take just one quote out of context. We come into this crisis in a very strong position. But it would be equally wrong for ministers not to say, when we are rightly providing support to islanders to stay in their jobs, that we will need to, in time of course, repay that borrowing. But let me be absolutely clear. Since I've moved into Treasury as well, I've been reviewing the numbers, as the Treasury Minister has, on a daily basis. And of course it's going to be challenging. But let me be clear, having looked at those numbers and also thinking about the extra money we're going to need and will put into the economy through the recovery phase and the way that we'll have to trim our own spending, I believe that if we come together as a community in the way that Senator Farnham was outlining in his opening remarks, even though it's going to be challenging, we can come out of the other side of this crisis and the recession that the FPP have said that we will encounter, a global recession. But if we come together and we think about using technology, we think about using entrepreneurs, and we think about the way that we do business here, the way we support one another, moving to a living wage economy, thinking about things differently. It's a real new coming together, asking ourselves, what is the vision for Jersey in the future? And I think that even with those difficulties that we've alluded to, we can come out of this in a strong position and face the future together. And islanders don't need, I don't believe, to be worried about the issues of tax rises. Of course, we'll decide that together. But despite that, I believe we can come out of this in a very strong position.
Fiona?
Thank you for that. And just to double check that, I mean, you spoke about having discussions with the Treasury Minister about the kind of ways in which spending might have to be trimmed, for example. And we've also about from the Treasury Minister yesterday, she was talking in terms of a massive black hole. Perhaps you might be able to assist islanders in terms of understanding the challenge you're facing in providing us with the sort of numbers you're looking at. Do you know how much the island is going to need to recuperate over the coming years?
Well, as we said in previous sessions like this, we've still, despite the 30% decline in the stock market, we've still got just over 700 million in the strategic reserve. We've taken the decision that we're not going to realise any illiquid assets in there or any assets which are sitting on theoretical investment losses. What we're going to do is seek to borrow against those assets. So the states agreed that the Treasury Minister could borrow up to £500 million. And what in our mind is that you've got this short-term position that needs to be bridged. So, of course, tax receipts will be down, social security contributions and GST payments are being deferred. And so you come back to the government needing cash to pay frontline workers, to pay pensions, to pay sick pay, to pay benefits, to provide support for islanders staying in jobs. And so we're still working on those bridging projections, and dependent on how we act as a government. Of course, we know that government expenditure grows when we employ more people. It grows when we've got lots of political priorities. I see no reason whatsoever why during this crisis the level of increased employment in the States is going to reduce, and that automatically is going to mean that the spend that we'd expected for 2020 is not going to reach those levels. And that, of course, is then going to help us moving into 2021 with how we reprioritise whether we need that spend, whether we need those jobs. And it's that bridging that we've got to talk about. But from what I've seen, as challenging as it will be, it may not be as painful as some islanders are now perceiving because of honest and open conversations that the Treasury ministers have had. So we'll need a 5-year plan, we'll need a 10-year plan, and we'll need a 20-year plan. And that's exactly the right approach.
Thank you, Fiona. Now we move to... We will come back to you at the end. Let's have some of the other journalists first. Harry Booth now from Channel 103.
Hello, thank you very much indeed. For those businesses that you spoke about today that will be really struggling with this, a lot of them may be lower paid employees. They'll be needing as much money as they can get right now with so many different pressures, rent, food, I could go on and go on. They could be losing this money now that they could have got with this extra 20% that their employer would be covering. Is that gone now? Have they just got to face that? Can the government not cover this 20% that these employees will be losing?
If I can come in there, I think it's fair to say that the businesses that cannot afford to pay the 20%, because something has happened here that's never happened before. We have forced some businesses to close. They have no customers. They have no income. So they are not able to pay the 20%, some businesses. And I think employees of those businesses, regrettably, are faced with two positions. One is being laid off or made redundant, or the other one is accepting up to 80% of their pay. Now, it's unfortunate that anybody has to take a drop in pay, but we think that this new position, we've evolved the scheme slightly, will enable businesses that cannot afford to pay the 20% to be able to retain their staff, to keep their staff on the books. And many of these staff working for small businesses has been with them for many years, and they've developed aptitudes and skills that are really important to those businesses. So this scheme is aimed at keeping them on the payroll so that when we get through this crisis, and we will get through it, those businesses have a much better chance of being able to open and survive as we move forward.
Can I just say, Senator Farnham is absolutely right, and this is a question that he and I have debated, and fellow ministers have debated, and we've spoken to businesses about, because in giving this element of flexibility around the 20% co-payment, businesses are going to have to show to government that they don't have that income and they don't have that cash in the bank. We call it working capital and cash flow, but basically that's it. They've got no money coming in and they've got no money in the bank. Because we knew that what that meant was that some businesses would be saying to their employees, in effect, your take home is going to be, or your salary is going to be 20% less. That's why we've put some rigour around what businesses are going to have to supply to government. We're introducing a new external audit function to audit these submissions as well. But for us, it was a very fine balance. Is it better for islanders to stay in a job with 80% of salary, or for the business that they were telling us, because they didn't have that cash, they would make them redundant and then have to go on income support. And on balance, as I say, it's a fine balance. On balance, ministers decided that if we could make it an application process, and we could say to businesses, look, we want you to really, really try to pay that 20% if you can. You can use the business guarantee loan scheme if you are looking for working capital. So there are other options, but we recognise that for some of you, no matter how much you'd like to be able to pay that 20%, is just not possible because you haven't got the cash at this moment in time. So keeping islanders in work rather than them having to go into income support, it does have difficulties, present that difficulty of the 20% less income for islanders, but we on balance thought that it was better for islanders to be keeping their jobs, so that Senator Farnham said again, when we get out of the health crisis, those businesses can be up and running far more easily with employees that they know, respect and can see a future with.
But for those businesses who absolutely can't, they've got no choice, could you not extend the support to really help them? Go up to 90%, for example?
We looked at a number of options. This is about a contract between government and businesses, and we think that on balance what we're proposing is the right approach.
Okay, just one more from me before I let the other journalists have a say. Charities, I wanted to get some clarification on that. It's been spoken about a lot, and we have so many, I'm sure it's the same for other journalists here getting in touch with us. They say their demand is going up all the time and their finances are going down, and obviously that's not a good balance for them, and we're going to need a lot of them when we come out of this. We're going to rely on their support. What can you say to them about what support you'll give them now, because they're pleading for it?
Either one of us could take that question, because we both have different hats on when it comes to charities. So charities are available to make application for the co-funded scheme. We've made that clear from the start. And both Senator Farnham in the lottery proceeds and myself in the dormant bank accounts are near to finalising being able to take those two. Senator Farnham's, I think, is about 1.7 million. He will confirm that. From the dormant bank accounts, we're talking about an initial tranche of 2 million. We might be able to double that in the coming months. And we're just in conversation with finalising the right body to distribute that to charities. And we've had a funding group come together to be able to support us with that distribution. We understand the pressure that charities are under, and we hope that that progress will be made either at the end of this week or the start of next week.
Yes, and just to confirm, we're working with a new charities distribution group, which we hope to get up and running. Initially, they'd be in the region of £3 million to start distributing, but that amount could increase as we move forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry. Now we move on to Gary Burgess from ITV Channel.
Hello to both of you. You've become quite the double act, a political bromance during this crisis. It also appears you're doing a sort of good cop, bad cop routine. One of you giving money, the other saying you've got to give it back. Two questions from ITV Channel television viewers. To Senator Gorst, first of all, this is from Jean-Marie, who asks, following your comments on repaying the rainy day fund, are you prepared to make millionaires pay the same rates of tax as everybody else? And to Senator Farnham from Joanna, who's a psychotherapist, she says so many self-employed people and small business owners hardly make much money at the best of times. The comments about tax rises are causing stress, sleep loss, and even nightmares about not being able to feed their children. These are classic signs of PTSD setting in. This lowers their immune system. I also know some who are turning to maladaptive coping strategies, including alcohol. Shouldn't your comments be focused on cleaning up the current mess? worry about replenishing the rainy day fund when the sun starts shining again?
Okay, shall I
go
start?
first, yeah.
If you'd seen the way Senator Gorst and I had been interacting over the past week and vigorously debating the merits or not of this scheme, bromance is probably the last word you would use. But having said that, I have full respect for Senator Gorst and all of my colleagues in the States Assembly and on the Council of Ministers. We don't always agree, but that's what politics is about. And we must all, from time to time, have the courage of our convictions to stand up and fight for what we think. And we've had some very robust and detailed conversations at Council of Ministers, and I think we've come to the right conclusion. I think I probably distance myself somewhat from the remarks that were made last week by Senator Gorst and yesterday by the Treasury Minister. It's probably not sensible for anybody to be speculating at the moment, whether we're ministers or states members or members of the public, to be speculating about what we might or might not do with our taxes in the future. The whole island knows that we run on the premise of receiving taxable income. And from my point of view, I'd like to get the economy up and running again as quickly as possible, so we can return to some kind of normality, whatever that is going to look like, to get the taxes coming back in again. The taxes that we used to paying, the taxes that we have been paying going into the situation. So we need to get back onto that sort of playing field as quickly as we possibly can. And then we have to understand what we are going to need to do, as Senator Gorst said earlier, to replenish the rainy day fund, but not in a year or 2 years, in 5, 10 years, a decade, maybe a 20-year plan to replenish it to a greater level than it was when we were going into this crisis. Because I think this crisis has shown us, no matter how prudent we've been in the past, we don't know what's around the corner. So I think, yes, we must replenish the rainy day fund, but we have to actually time our announcements properly. We have to make sure they're considered. None of us know. We're estimating, producing all sorts of figures. None of us know exactly what the financial impact of this crisis is going to be yet. If it goes on, it could be worse than we think. If it finishes sooner, we could be in a better position. But I don't want to cause any lack of confidence in businesses now, and I don't want to see any extra anxiety caused to any islanders. So we must deal with this sensibly. I support Senator Gorst and the Treasury Minister. We're good, strong colleagues, but perhaps we must think about the timing of such announcements a little more carefully. Thank you.
Senator Gorst, just before you give me your very carefully considered answer, can I just ask, as part of your answer, how does it feel to be so publicly smacked down by a colleague 2 meters away from you?
I'm used to it. I've done other jobs than this one. I'm used to constant criticism and disagreement. That never interrupts me. In all my political career, I've always sought to be open, transparent and honest with the public of Jersey and treat them like grown-ups and not try to sugarcoat things. So I stand by the fact that when we are spending our reserves in a way that I fully support and think is the right thing to do, it would be wrong of me not to be honest about the difficult decisions that will need to be made into the future. But of course, I apologise if I have caught my words and that honesty and openness has caused any islander extra suffering at this time, because I understand the suffering and the concern and in some cases the fear that islanders feel at the heart of this crisis. Some of it is based on the fact of what's happening here in Jersey. Some of it is based on what they're seeing around the world. But I say this to those that my words have caused extra distress to. I'm sorry about that. I really am, because I recognise the distress that many islanders are under. But I will always, always want to tell islanders openly and honestly where we are in Jersey and why I said what I said before. There will be these difficult challenges and decisions to make. But having looked at those numbers and having seen the strategy of the government, I absolutely believe, despite those difficulties, we can come out of this crisis well. That's why we've been listening to businesses about saying that the 20% doesn't need to be mandatory, but every business should really try to pay it if they can. And we'll continue to listen to islanders and businesses. And sometimes our honesty and openness might be difficult. We won't stop doing that. Well, I won't stop doing that. But I really believe that we can work together to come out of this stronger. It will be different. We can't pretend we're just going to go back to how it was before COVID, because it won't be like that. The world is changing. But we start from such a strong position that navigating those difficulties and changes, we can do well.
And just on the taxing millionaires more, when you said we're all in this together, just on that point.
That will be a decision for all of the states' assembly. And I think what people are saying when they ask about that question is whether we should have that, what we call the 2-1E regime. I've always supported that regime where we can see the benefit not only of the tax that's being paid, but also the jobs and the enterprise that's being brought to the island. And so looking at that and making sure that we focus it much more in the future to those that are bringing real wealth, real jobs and real enterprise to Jersey, then I support that. Of course, some of my ministerial colleagues don't support that.
Gary, do you have any more questions?
I've got absolutely loads, but I'll give Ian a go because that's only fair.
So now we've got Ian Heath from the Jersey Evening Post.
Good afternoon. Can you both hear me?
Yes, Ian.
Yes.
Okay. It seems quite clear the government hasn't reached consensus on whether we're going to be putting taxes up or not. That's fine. Might I ask you, is there any alternative measures of raising funds post-crisis being looked at? For example, selling government assets?
So I am absolutely of the view that the way that we've done things in government in the past cannot be the way that we do it in the future. That will be a real missed opportunity for Jersey to come together to face the future. Some commentators have said and asked the question, why do we have so much resource in real estate assets? And it's a good question, because in the changing world of digitalisation and technology, the use of those assets is going to be transformed as well. And so we in government should think about what assets we're invested in and how we can support enterprise and digitalisation and the future desires of our young people in a different way. And there's also some creative things that we can do around the green agenda and think about supporting that in a new entrepreneurial way. So we've got to move ourselves from the mindset of going back to how things were. And I understand that that is difficult for some of us, but we really do. If we come together and we have our conversations and our arguments, but conversations, we start to listen to each other more, we start to garner ideas from right across our community, I think it's a really fantastic opportunity to transform this island that we love and that is our future into one that all islanders can feel proud about and all young people feel they've got a future in. And importantly, during this crisis, that all older people feel supported and protected in.
Okay, I mean, just to be clear, it kind of sounded like a yes. So the sale of government assets might be considered. Is that correct?
I think we can't say that anything is off the table. This is a I don't know how many times you want me to say it. For my part, this is a new world we are entering. And therefore, all of the things that we've taken for granted in the past, we should look in a different way. And the government has got lots of capital invested in assets, not really returning very much. We struggle to transform them for the benefit of islanders. That cannot be the way that if I use a technical term, that's all of the things we've got on our balance sheet. That cannot be the way we manage our finances in the future.
Yes, sure. Thank you. I want to talk about what's been said this week in terms of tax rises and what have you. We all know that for the business community, things that are very important are confidence, planning, attracting investment and stuff like that. Would you think it's fair to say the government's got its messaging wrong in that regard this week? Really, they need to be saying to businesses, look, we're going to back you, we're going to boost you, we're going to create a good environment for you to rebuild our economy post-crisis, rather than saying, we want our money back as soon as possible.
Thank you, Ian. I think I've made my position clear in answer to Gary's question, and I'm not wanting to be critical of ministerial colleagues. I have the utmost respect for Senator Gorst and the Treasury Minister. Senator Gorst is an accountant, remember, so he has a propensity to go straight for the figures, and we need that sort of, we do need that prudence. In answer to your previous question, no meaningful discussions have taken place yet about the sale of assets. But as I alluded to in my opening comments, as we come through this crisis, as Senator Gore said, we must be open-minded and prepared to look at the opportunities that arise. We have an opportunity here to look at our finances, to look in the past at the way we've been managing them, and to look for opportunities about how we can do that better. And I think we have a duty to all taxpayers to provide them with the absolute best value for money we possibly can. And that's where I'm going to be coming from as we work to re-emerge from this crisis.
So Ian, I think that question was also addressed at me again. That's three questions we've had on this subject now. So I continue to stand by ministers being open and honest with the public. Anything else, to my mind, is the completely wrong approach. And I've stood in this room. I've watched similar conferences to this, where the 4 individuals representing media outlets have been criticising ministers for not giving enough information and not being open enough. Let me be absolutely clear. I've been criticised in the past for being too supportive of business and too supportive of financial services and only interested in business. But I've always sought to talk about not only the pros and why business is so important to this community and to its future, but also raise the hard questions, even though there aren't at this point answers to them. And I think treating islanders in an adult, grown-up way is absolutely the right way to treat them.
I think just moving ahead, talking about the support we're giving now, because and I support Senator Gorst. I can't reiterate that enough. But I think what we need to focus on now is the support. What we're focusing on now is the support packages we've put in place for business. Now, some businesses would want more, but it's important that we keep within what we can afford now as an island, because we have to have some money available for the recovery process. So we've put significant sums, over 300 million, could go into supporting business over the next 2 to 3 months. But we do need to have some money in the bank for the next phase, which will be upon us before we know it.
Okay, that perhaps takes me on to what I'm guessing might be my last question. Businesses now, they're talking about moving into the planning phase. We seem to be stabilising a little bit if we can. Certainly, we're getting down to fine detail with your financial support. What's happened so far from the government in terms of what's going to happen during the recovery phase? I had Graham Smith of Jersey business talking to me about, strategic investment being required. Could you perhaps help businesses a little bit with their planning, let them know what's in store for them in terms of that? What do you have on the agenda at this stage?
Well, of course, Jersey Business, I pay tribute to Graham and the team at Jersey Business who've been on the front line of this crisis and have been helping with guidance and advice hundreds of businesses. And they can provide all sorts of practical and professional advice to businesses to help them plan into the future, from their own business strategic planning to cash flow forecasting and budgeting. But if I've understood the question right, the drivers for our economy, delivery of economic, to bring the economy out of this, Ian, if I've got it right, are you looking for the drivers that we're utilising?
You mentioned you want to keep some money in reserves there for the recovery phase, which implies to me that you're going to use it as some sort of investment. Jersey Business have been talking about strategic investment, putting money in the right sectors of the economy to get it going again. I'm just kind of wondering what you have on the drawing board for that phase now. Well, and as I mentioned, businesses.
Yes, that's funny enough. We had our first meeting of that in the last few days. I can't remember what day it was. They all blur into one at the moment. And we were presented with a very good paper by officers, what I have in front of me here, about how preliminary discussions on economic recovery. And they listed out a number of very, very good options right through what our priorities are now, and some ideas for regeneration, growth and financial stimulus. But, we're also listening to and looking closely at our fiscal policy panel forecast. And of course, we're analysing information from the OECD so we can understand the immediate hits to our gross domestic product, or GVA as we tend to refer to it over here. I won't go into all the detail of the paper I have in front of me now, but we have some really good and strong ideas that we're beginning to work out.
Many chance you could give us an inkling of what sort of things they might be?
And not at this stage, no.
Okay.
Okay, we'll have a little scoot round everybody again. Fiona from Bailiwick Express.
Thank you. If I might turn to Senator Gorst again, just to dig into a bit of the detail about how we'll be dealing with the crisis moving forward. As you mentioned, nothing's off the table, but you've previously said borrowing is obviously going to be a key element for us. We know that the Treasury Minister has the ability now to borrow up to 500 million. Is that an indication that this is the quantity that we're looking to borrow? And how far has this plan moved forward? Does the Minister share the sentiments of many that the island should be looking to get hold of this money as quickly as possible while the interest rates are low?
The officials in Treasury Department have worked very hard over the course of the last number of days since the States approved that proposal. We've had a good response to our rounds of conversations. As I've said before, I think the current preferred option, although this needs to be finally approved by the Minister and she'll have to discuss with Council colleagues, is to go up to that maximum that's allowed, but for using a short-term credit facility, that's probably 2 to 3 years with the banks.
Thank you for providing that detail. And might I also ask you on a factual query, can you provide an update on Jersey's investments at the moment? You mentioned that the markets globally have dropped 30%, but specifically, how is the state's own portfolio performing?
Well, that won't have decreased since we published the latest information, which was post the dramatic decline caused by COVID-19, and at that point the strategic reserve was standing at around £750 million. The Social Security Reserve Fund was about 1.7 billion pounds, which is goes to my point that we go into this crisis in a very strong position. But we will be borrowing against those reserves to the tune of £500 million.
Okay, thank you. And just one final query. I asked earlier, I don't believe I got any kind of numbers on the kind of measurements, what we're expecting in terms of the tax receipts going down, GST deferrals. What will that be costing the government? What is at the moment the estimation of this black hole in numbers?
Well, there's a short-term cash flow issue. That is the deferral of GST. GST annually is, I'm just thinking at the top of my head, being a new boy in this role, about £80 million. So you've got 2 quarters deferral there, so you can do the sums. Income tax reductions, we don't have the final numbers on what we think that might be, but of course we know that those who are on prior year payments, they'll have amassed a full year's worth of income tax liability for the end of 2019, but they will then be having difficulty potentially making those payments in 2020, and so that is an area that we are looking at very closely to see how we can maybe restructure that debt or support islanders in that particular process. Of course, the income tax forecasting group, it's very difficult for them to actually have evidence of activity to understand where those forecasts might lie, but they're continuing to do their work together with the fiscal policy panel.
Thank you very much.
Fiona. Now Harry from Channel 103.
Thank you very much. Senator Gorst, you spoke previously about budgeting for this scheme possibly being extended. I suppose businesses will want to have as much assurance as they can going forward, that they can get as much support as they can going forward, especially into the summer months where many sectors may normally have a slowdown in money. Can you commit to say that the scheme will be extended at this moment?
Well, what we've said is that this is a 3-month scheme, and yet in Treasury we have budgeted for 2 more months, and that gives businesses and islanders certainty. Of course, whether we need to use that extra 2 months worth of support will depend on what happens during the course of the next 2 months.
I suppose the extra support, they'll hear that you've budgeted for it, and if they don't get it, they'll be a bit disappointed, won't they?
No, we've budgeted for that extra support, so that will be dependent on what happens with the actual health crisis during the course of the next 2 months.
Okay, and just finally from me, I know you've mentioned it before, but I think it's just to get some clarity for businesses that might not be able to pay this 20%. Do you mind just giving clear examples of what exactly they have to prove to be able to not have to pay this 20%?
Yes, that's quite straightforward, that they have little or no income and that they have little or no working capital. So to you and me, that means they've got no cash coming in and they've got no cash in the bank, and we're developing a self declaration form that they will submit to Customer and Local Services it is now, and then we will in due course audit those submissions.
Thank you, Harry. Now we move on to Gary Burgess from ITV Channel News.
Senator Gorst, just in light of Senator Farnham slapping you down and saying your bromance is over, I just wonder, at a time when communication and how things are communicated really matters to very worried people right now, how much you consider whether things you are saying come across as either tone deaf or lacking emotional intelligence, or that you've had an empathy fail? Do you think about these things?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Senator Farnham and myself are human beings. We live in families in the island. We both probably have older relatives. We have younger children. So all of the things that the government measures are being brought forward affect us directly. You know, I've had to have, as we all have, difficult conversations with the young members of our family running to us at night when they're scared and they're having difficult dreams, just like those young children can't hug their grandparents. So what we are saying and what we are doing, we absolutely understand the effect that it has. But I will not, and I have never stood back from being honest with islanders. And I stand by that point. Colleagues might think I've gone too far. Commentators might think I've gone too far, but I am not now going to start stepping back from being honest with islanders and with colleagues.
And Senator Farnham, just briefly, there was quite a low take-up of the Phase 1 scheme. What do you expect the take-up to be for Phase 2?
I think take-up for Phase 2 will be quite strong because we're deeper into the crisis now. So whereby businesses might have had some reserve in early March, by the time we get to the end of April into May, we're going to see those reserves being exhausted. So they're going to, I predict that more businesses will be calling upon Phase 2. Having said that, I think the budgets we've put in are pretty much a maximum figure. Those budgets were calculated pretty much on all workers, all businesses and all sectors applying and getting funding. I think realistically that's not going to happen. So I do think the take-up will be more than Phase 1, but we'll be within our budgets. And can I just say about the comments about slapping down my good friend Senator Gorst, which wasn't the intention. Ian and I work extremely well together. Ian has put an enormous amount of work and civic responsibility into Jersey, and he is an honest, hard-working politician, and there's far more that unites us than divides us. It is, however, important that we have a good, healthy tension, and we're prepared to debate and disagree with each other from time to time. That tension does exist, but it's healthy, and the Council and Ministers are united and determined to do a really good job for islanders over the next few months.
Thank you. Now, finally, Ian Heath from the JEP.
Okay, just one last one. This is probably directed more at Senator Farnham. So far, we've seen mainly support for businesses come from the payroll support scheme. I was just wondering, now that we seem to be getting down to nitty-gritty of that, are you looking at any other alternative forms of support for businesses? I've had some feedback from guys who are saying, for example, they would like assistance with coordination of delivery systems. You know, small businesses find it difficult to do that on their own. There's other guys who are saying, you know, they're doing essential services nowadays because they're doing food deliveries and what have you. They're saying, well, we need government grants to get our message out and promote ourselves. Is anything like that being looked at this stage, and would you be able to tell us about it?
Nearly all of our focus has been on refining the payroll schemes and the current package of measures that we've put in place. But we had this discussion the other day with officers and ministers, and we realised as we get deeper into the crisis, new challenges might emerge, changes in market behaviour, changes in consumer spending. Some in line with what we predicted. We're beginning to see some slight changes. So the short answer is we haven't had detailed discussions on anything in particular above what we're offering now. But as Senator Gorst said earlier, we're certainly alive to everything that's going on. We're monitoring business sectors on a daily basis, and our doors are open to listen to any concerns or new challenges that might come up.
Is this something we can expect more of a shift towards now in the next few weeks then? Would that be fair to say?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Could we turn the volume up a bit?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
That's a bit better, thank you.
Yeah, would it be fair to say that we could expect to see a bit more of a shift towards that phase of support now that, like you said, you seem to have done most of your work refining the payroll support scheme?
Yes, as I've said now, preliminary discussions have begun in earnest on economic recovery. That will include further support packages, and I'm working closely with Senator Gorst, the Treasury Minister, Minister for Social Security, and the Chief Minister on that team, and that will very much be our highest priority once we've launched the final Phase 2 payroll scheme.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
Thank you very much to members of the media. That concludes today's questions from the media.
Thank you very much. Can I just finish in the usual way by thanking the media for being here and for asking us some tough questions and reporting us to islanders in this important time. And these are strange and unprecedented times. They are difficult, complicated, but they have reminded us how important our family, our friends, and community is to us. We have been made to keep apart from each other, but in many ways we have been brought closer together, and together we will prevail. Thank you.